Guitar Co-op Podcasts. Great composers. Conceived and presented by Fabio Zanon. An epithet is an adjective or a noun that is associated with a name to qualify it. Everyone knows Alexander the Great, Jesus the Christ, Simon Bolivar the Liberator, Richard the Lionheart. Things start to get a bit funny when a well-known personality serves to define a lesser-known figure. For instance, Falcão is the Pelé of indoor soccer, or Rameau is the Isaac Newton of music. Others serve to describe a discredited activity. For example, Louis Armstrong is the Mozart of jazz. The guitar, being a niche and often discredited instrument, has several of those, like Fernando Sor is the Beethoven of the guitar, Barrios is the Paganini of the Paraguayan jungle, Weiss is the Bach of the lute, Hauser is the guitar Stradivarius, and so on. All of them are grossly exaggerated and produce red herrings and generalizations. One of the most affectionate and at the same time misleading epithets is that of our composer of the month, Miguel Llobet, the guitarist of Impressionism. This is Miguel Llobet's Mazurka, performed by Aniello Desiderio, in a playlist that you can access through the description of this episode. This epithet arises from the fact that Llobet lived for several years in Paris, from where he managed to maintain an international career in the first decades of the 20th century. There, he personally met composers also erroneously called Impressionists, such as Debussy, Ravel, and Fauré, who attended his concerts. This, combined with the occasional more modern chord in some of his compositions, led the Italian guitarist Bruno Tognazzi to give the title Miguel Llobet, Guitarist of Impressionism, to a small book. As it happens, musicologists and guitarists began to apply a confirmation bias to the investigations so that they can confirm the preconceived view that Llobet was indeed the guitarist of Impressionism. Frankly, I don't think that helps. Prelude in A major by Llobet, performed by Lorenzo Micheli. Historically, Llobet is the most sophisticated and resourceful composer-guitarist of the late Romantic period. He was trained under the Romantic aroma of Francisco Tárregas, but at the same time he was one of the first guitarists to make recordings and to pursue an international career in the modern sense. In the decades of 1910 and 20, he lived in Paris and Buenos Aires, touring on both sides of the Atlantic. At that time, his reputation was unparalleled. It was only eclipsed by the arrival of the Andalusian Andrés Segovia. Segovia amplified Llobet's qualities, and he arrived with a more ambitious artistic project and a much greater thirst for fame. But without Llobet, there would be no Segovia as we understand him. In fact, much of today's guitar wouldn't be what it is without Llobet. This is Andrés Segovia playing El Noy de la Mare, arranged by Miguel Llobet. Miguel Llobet Soles. He was born in Barcelona on October 18, 1878. He came from an artistic family. His father was known as a sculptor of wooden religious figures, and his studio was frequented by artists and musicians. The boy learned graphic arts, a talent that he cultivated throughout his life, even exhibiting his works. After learning a bit of piano and violin, at age 11 he received a guitar from an uncle and began taking lessons with a certain Magi Alegre, who took him on December 18th, 1889, to see a concert by the blind virtuoso Antonio Jiménez Manjon. It was at this moment that he sealed his destiny with the guitar. This is Llobet's Scherzo Waltz, played by Giulio Tampalini, a track that you can hear complete in the playlist that we prepare for you, and you can access at the description. After 4 years, his teacher also introduced him to the great Spanish master of his time, Francisco Tárrega. Tárrega will have an episode all his own in a future episode. Tárrega lived, in fact, only a few blocks away from Llobet's home. He became Tárrega's student at the Barcelona City Conservatory. That was a place where, at that time, some of the most distinguished musicians studied, including cellists Casals and Caçador, pianist Ricardo Viñes, and the fellow guitarist Emilio Pujol. It was not until he was 20 in 1898 that Llobet began giving concerts. At first, private concerts for a circle that was formed around Tárrega in the conservatory. It was not until 1900 that he gave his first fully professional concert in Málaga. This is Christmas Night, La Nit de Natal, a Catalan folk song arranged by Llobet and played by Julian Bream. In Malaga, he met Tárrega's patroness, Dona Concepción Jacobi, who also offered to sponsor him, which led to a minor dispute with Tárrega. Of course, they maintained a friendship after the incident, and the benefactor's support proved decisive. In the early years of the 20th century, his progress was very fast. He had a resounding success in Valencia and at the Teatro de la Comedia in Madrid in 1902, which led to the Spanish royal family to invite him to perform in a private function. There, his colleague, the pianist Ricardo Vinhas, decided to organize his first concert outside Spain in Paris in 1904, always guided by hand by Dona Concepción. This is Estudio Caprice by Llobet, here performed by Stefano Grondona. There is an account of this Paris concert by writer Jenny Villiers-Wardle in a book called Spain of the Spanish. It was in Paris that I first had the pleasure of making this musician's acquaintance, and I confess to a feeling of intense surprise when I heard him softly playing the opening notes of Chopin's most exquisite nocturne. I had never thought of associating the guitar with serious music, but in Llobet's hands it gave us Bach and Mendelssohn, Chopin and Beethoven. This sounds incredible, but then the guitar is capable of wonderful things, in thoroughly capable hands, of course. Towards the end of the evening, we pressed the artist to give us something truly Spanish, and he played, in memorable style, a jota composed by Tárrega himself. A glorious piece of music, full of brilliant life, music expressed in delicious sounds what Zuloaga's pictures express in color. We are listening to La Filla del Marchand, the merchant's daughter, played by Andrés Segovia. This track is in the playlist that accompanies this episode, and you can access in the description. I think this account encapsulates much of the view of the guitar that still persists to this day within the classical music world. The guitar is useless for serious music until you've exhausted yourself playing a transcription by some famous composer. Once the guitarist has earned respect, what the public really wants to hear are Spanish melodies and music with a popular background. This is Leonesa by Llobet and played by Llobet himself. Llobet lived in Paris from 1905 to 1910. From there, in 1910, he made his first tour of South America and made Buenos Aires his temporary residence. These concerts were usually produced by prominent local guitarists such as Domingo Prat and Juan Anido, who was the father of Maria Luisa Anido, who would later on become a tremendous guitarist herself. All these guitarists soon realized that a new era had begun for the guitar. We are listening to Stefano Grondona playing Respuesta by Miguel Llobet. From Buenos Aires, Llobet headed north, including Brazil and the Caribbean, and in 1912 he landed in the United States for the first time, always with the help of local admirers in New York, Boston, and Philadelphia. Returning to Europe in 1912, his attention turned to Germany. In Munich, he was welcomed by the local guitar society as a hero. When the First World War broke, he returned to Buenos Aires and made two further tours of the United States in 1914 and 19. Today, we have this feeling that a truly international guitar career was a brainchild of Segovia, who in fact performed and toured the world for over 50 years. But before that, Llobet had already played successfully and with great acclaim in major cities such as Berlin, Cologne, Dresden, Stuttgart, London, Amsterdam, and in several major American cities more than once. From 1925 onward, Llobet began making recordings. They are already electric recordings, as previous acoustic recordings had not particularly attracted him. His discography is extremely limited and fits the size of a CD. It's about an hour of music. It far from covers a significant sample of his repertoire, including no major works or any of his own compositions. However, they are a significant record of a new era of guitar playing, one in which the concert guitar was invented, but before it was taken by storm by the dominant personality of Andrés Segovia. It is a source of incalculable study for historical interpretation. This is an andantino by Fernando Sor, played by Miguel Llobet, a track that is part of the playlist that accompanies this episode. Llobet was a great teacher. I suppose he was even the leading teacher in the world in the first decades of the 20th century. His students also dedicated themselves to teaching until as late as the 1980s. That means that my generation can still benefit from this direct line with only 3 degrees of separation between us and Llobet. In Argentina, he gave final training to Maria Luisa Nido, who was to become a major concert performer and a teacher. They even made recordings together as a duet. In Barcelona, among many others, he taught the Cuban José Rey de la Torre, who would go on to become an exceptional guitarist and a teacher both in Cuba and in the United States. By the way, Manuel Barrueco was one of his students. In Vienna, he mentored Luise Walker, who in turn became a teacher in the local conservatory for many decades. In Uruguay, he taught Isaías Savio, who was later to become the leading guitar teacher in Brazil. As we can see, Llobet had the tentacles, his students teaching in both sides of the Atlantic and in the North and South hemispheres. There is a controversy about his relationship with Segovia. I think Segovia must have had formal training with Llobet. He was way too intelligent to miss the opportunity to learn from the man who was clearly the greatest guitarist of his time. However, he doesn't mention this in his autobiography, and in person he was always evasive when anybody asked about Llobet. As for Segovia, it is possible they had some kind of falling out. Nevertheless, Segovia made some extraordinary recordings of Llobet's Catalan songs. This is Llobet's El Mestre, the Master, recorded by Andrés Segovia. In the 1930s, his activity declined significantly. Rey de la Torre reports that between 1932 and 1934, when he was Llobet's student, he only left Barcelona once for a Scandinavian tour. He lived in a spacious apartment in Barcelona, dedicating himself to teaching and attending concerts without receiving many visitors. The outbreak of the Spanish Civil War greatly affected his sensitivity. The musicologist Philip Bone claims that Llobet died during a bombardment, but this did not happen. The composer Jaume Parrissa reports seeing Llobet wandering aimlessly through the streets of Barcelona. He seemed completely devastated, defeated by the circumstances, and completely apathetic. It's safe to say that his health failed after seeing his beloved city of Barcelona destroyed. He died of pleurisy during the Civil War in 1938 at age 59. This is Plani, a Catalan folk song played by Julian Bream. Llobet's legacy is thus divided into 4 areas: composer, teacher, concert guitarist, and arranger. I don't think that a complete work on Llobet has yet been published that does justice to his biography and output. In recent history, Bruno Tognazzi and Ronald Purcell have published biographical essays of great value, though contradictory in some respects. Rey de la Torre's testimonies are surely the most fascinating, as he discusses details of technique and interpretation that only a concert guitarist could discuss. More recently, 2 guitarists have demonstrated a special affinity with Llobet: the Italian Stefano Grondona, who has prepared a new edition of his works in 15 volumes, and the Spaniard Carles Trepat, who even owns Llobet's guitar Torres, and seems almost like a reincarnation of the master, even in his demeanor and his style of playing. This is the Cançó del Ladre, the thief song played by Carles Trepat. Many mistakenly say that Llobet is an old-fashioned guitarist compared to Segovia, as he did not dedicate himself to larger-scale works like sonatas or suites, and played only the miniatures typical of the early Romantic guitar. Furthermore, he didn't, like Segovia, commission new works for non-guitarist composers. There is a completely unfounded rumor that Debussy had intended to write music for the guitar, and Llobet would have discouraged him. None of this is documented, and for sure this is not true. There are countless great works written for and dedicated to Llobet, starting with the famous Homenaje by Manuel de Falla. But of course, he had not reached yet the point that Segovia would reach in the 1920s and 30s, commissioning portentous sonatas and variations from conservative composers. But still, Llobet did play the Sonata No. 1 by the Spaniard López Chávarri, and many of the recently published works by Ponce, Brocqua, Torroba, and Turina. This is Miguel Llobet's recording of Manuel Ponce La Pajarera from the 3 Mexican songs. You can hear this track in the playlist that we have prepared to accompany this episode. Access it in the description. The fact is, his discography dates back to the 1920s. It was impossible to record more than 4 minutes of music without interruption. Recording contracts between artists and the recording companies stipulated 5 or 6 albums per year, that is, only 5 or 6 3-minute tracks. He had to have a commercial eye, having recorded predominantly in South America. That explains the predominance of arrangements of popular songs, many of which he recorded and re-recorded. It's understandable. In other words, the discography doesn't paint a complete portrait of Miguel Llobet. This is one of Llobet's most celebrated recordings, Napoleon Cost's Etude number 23. Likewise, Llobet was not prolific as a composer. His best-known works remain the 13 arrangements of Catalan folk songs. Some people consider them simple harmonizations of popular songs. Others, like myself, consider them compositions based on pre-existing melodies in which the composer's fingerprint is present in every second of the music. What I find most impressive is how Llobet manages to create enormous harmonic interest with relatively few notes. He manages to suggest a prism of harmonies, often with thin chords and only 2 or 3 notes. This is Lorenzo Micheli playing the Prelude in D major by Llobet. His original compositions are few, but I see a huge development over the previous generation. It's a work that is free of concessions to facile guitarism. He makes all the technical effort necessary to ensure that the harmonization and internal writing of the voices are rich, perfect, consistently surprising. There's no banality, no mistakes, no trivial passages or obvious harmonizations, especially when we compare him to the previous generation of Tárrega and Manjón, or even to contemporaries like Barrios or Modani. This is already evident in his first guitar work, the Chopinesque Romanza, which he wrote aged 18. This is Stefano Grondona playing Romanza in C minor by Miguel Llobet. Llobet's output is not consistent. He wrote a couple of works in 1908, then a page of music in 1916, another one in 1918, randomly, and there are only 11 original works. He gradually modulated his style from this Chopinesque atmosphere to a more sophisticated salon style in works like Scherzo Waltz and the Mazurka, until he reached a highly refined style where there is never a harmonic movement without a chromatic accent or a suspended dissonance, Wagner style, or the occasional exotic scale. I think his best music is found in the preludes. Take, for example, this prelude in E major, which is in fact his last work from 1935. It is clearly written in light of the recent publication of Bach's Prelude Fuga in Allegro, which it seems to parody. This is Michael Tröster playing Prelude in E major by Miguel Llobet, which you can hear together with other lovely tracks in the playlist that accompanies this episode. Llobet's weirdest, most unusual piece is the Variations on a Theme by Soul. To start with, the theme is not by Soul. It is a much older song, the famous Folias de España, which is of immemorial origin. I find it a completely disjointed piece, beginning with two of Soul's own variations and continuing with his own extremely difficult variations that don't form a very convincing narrative. Despite having some lovely moments, especially the slow variation is a very, very delicate work. This piece reminds me of the fact that only 40 years separate Soul's death and Llobet's birth, while more than 100 years separate us from the peak of Llobet's career. Who knows? Maybe Llobet's playing of Soul is closer to Soul's style than our own musicology suggests. This is the exciting Russian guitarist Ravshan Mamed-Kuliev playing Llobet's variations on the Spanish Folia, or variations on a theme by Soul. And with this piece, I will leave you, not before mentioning Monique Zacheski as the general manager and Henrique Caldas for the technical works. Stay with us for the next episode. Thank you. Bye-bye. Guitar Co-op Podcasts. Great composers. Conceived and presented by Fabio Zanon.